Hi, thank you for watching Digging to China. I'm Dong Shong. If you have not done so already, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much. 10 years ago, economists at the JP Morgan Chase compared and contrasted China's swelling credit risks with what happened in Japan in the 1980s on the eve of the bursting Japan's bubble. The conclusion? China was more like Japan in the 1970s with a low household debt and plenty of scope still for urbanization and a capacity for decent 6 to 7% growth. Fast forward to 2022 and the JP Morgan team did another check-in. This time, things aren't looking quite so rosy. Zhu Haibing, the lead economist, wrote, "The worrisome news is that China has become increasingly similar to Japan in the late 1980s. Why is that? For one, China's household debt surged to 62% of GDP in 2021 from 28% a decade before. That compares with Japan's experience of climbing to over 60% in 1989 from about 26% in 1971. 2. China's corporate debt has remained high at around 160% of GDP, which is even higher than Japan's 147% in mid-1990. 3. China's demographics are changing even faster than Japan's, with population growth stepping down and an aging problem that's bigger than Japan's at a similar development stage. Of course, there are some differences, big differences. Beijing has much greater oversight of the housing market through administrative controls than Tokyo did. Its financial system remains dominated by the state sector, and its capital account is largely closed, leaving Chinese households with fewer options than Japanese ones had. JP Morgan's outlook doesn't include any forecast for a crisis, but the team warns that Beijing will need to carefully manage the real estate downturn to limit spillovers through measures such as boosting the public housing and the rental market. Roselia Yao is a China property market specialist at Japanstyle. She is not so confident the administrators are providing a bottom for the downturn. She wrote in a note, "The problems constraining both the supply and the demand of housing in China are not getting resolved. In the longer term, even if property sales stabilize, the downward adjustment from the peak will still mean a lower level of construction activity and materials demand in coming years." Several other economists expect that China will avoid a Japan-style stagnation if the right policies take effect. For one, China's income levels and theoretically spending have much room to grow. China's per capita GDP in 2021 was less than a fifth of that in the United States, and adjusted net national income per capita was about 1/7 of that in the United States, according to World Bank data. Larry Hu, chief China economist at Macquarie, said, "Given the room for catch-up is still there, China is still going to maintain 4 to 5% growth in the next 5 to 10 years. Mr. Hu said there are uncertainties that could affect his estimates, including whether China can shift from relying on investment to consumption for growth. Another area of potential is China's plan to unify business standards and access within the country, said Dan Wang, chief economist at the Hang Seng Bank China. Once those barriers can be lifted, that can increase income by a great deal. She noted how current practice can favor a company from a local city over one from another province. A stark example of this regional bias has played out last year when different COVID rules among provinces created inefficiency. Wang also believes overseas demand and increased investment in manufacturing in China could support growth in the coming years. Overall speaking, more economists are less optimistic. Michael Pettis is a finance professor at Peking University. He said, "China has an even more extreme version of the Japanese imbalance, making it harder to rely on consumption for growth. Following the burst of a bubble in stocks and real estate, Japan's economy has stagnated, generally growing more slowly than the US and China since the 1990s. Japan grew rapidly in the 1970s and the 1980s thanks to high growth in exports and infrastructure investment. But by the early 1990s, the country was increasingly investing in wasteful projects, said Pettis. He said Japan has not been able to turn to its consumers to drive growth, primarily because the manufacturing sector has not been able to accept the needed transition to higher wages. China won't necessarily follow Japan's path if, and it is a big if, China can make substantial changes to its political institutions, said Pettis. But he said, the more likely scenario is that China doesn't enter a financial crisis or sharp economic crisis, and instead is more likely to face a very long Japan-style period of low growth. If non-productive investment, primarily in infrastructure and property, is reduced and not replaced with an equivalent source of growth, Pettis estimated China's GDP would grow by no more than 2 or 3% annually in coming years. Ultimately, China's economy may have to turn to its government for help. Zhu Ning is an author and a professor of finance and a deputy dean at the Shanghai Advanced Institute of Finance. His book, China's Guaranteed Bubble, was published in 2016. He said that the best solution to unemployment and housing bubble problems is increased state support. Ironically, Zhu warned of the risks of excessive government support in his 2016 book. Now he believed that the situation in Japan may actually be a reason to warrant some more planning economy approach. I cannot think of a market-based approach, he said. Just as Japan built up its social safety net during a bubble period, China should put more resources into ensuring 3 basic needs: housing, healthcare, and education. Relieving Chinese consumers of those costs could encourage them to spend, Zhu said. I agree. But how to relieve the burden of costs of the housing, healthcare, and education is far easier said than done. Socialism? I don't think so. Thank you for watching. Please leave a comment and subscribe to my channel. Just click the subscribe button right here. I'll see you again shortly. Until then, be well.